The situation in Sudan is worsening further, with the focus on El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur. After an 18-month siege, the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, claim control of the city. This is not an isolated episode, but a peak within a conflict that has continued for more than 2.5 years and ranks among the most serious and complex humanitarian crises of the contemporary era. The capture of El Fasher is not only of military significance, it triggers new allegations of crimes, multiplies displacement, and prompts official reactions from major international organizations, particularly the United Nations and the European Union. The domino effect outlined in the text is threefold: military consolidation on the ground, growing humanitarian pressure, and the activation, or reactivation, of diplomatic and accountability channels. El Fasher thus becomes the main theater of confrontation between two armed poles. On the one hand, the RSF led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. On the other, the forces loyal to the government in Khartoum, described as joint forces, under the leadership of General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. After prolonged attrition, the RSF declare they have taken the Army's main military base inside the city and consolidated urban control. The regular army, while avoiding a point-by-point confirmation, acknowledges a withdrawal to safer positions, wording that suggests the loss of key points within the urban perimeter. The text interprets this sequence as a phase change, not a mere raid, but the shift to stable control with direct repercussions on government defenses and, above all, on civilian life. Strategically, this reshapes local and regional balances, giving the RSF operational depth and greater power projection. Concurrently with the military advance, reports of serious human rights violations increase. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, notes numerous alarming reports concerning not only El Fasher, but also Bara in North Kordofan. The allegations involve summary executions of civilians fleeing, possibly along ethnic lines, and widespread sexual violence against women and girls. The text recalls the episode in Jenaina, West Darfur, in the spring of 2023, when, after capturing the city, the RSF allegedly killed up to 15,000 civilians, predominantly non-Arabs. This reference is not incidental. It serves to show a pattern, the possible repetition of a script of selective, identity-based violence. The allegations thus do not merely describe the excesses of wartime brutality, they outline potential war crimes and, prospectively, the need for credible accountability mechanisms. The problem of verifying information is central. Videos circulated by activists show bodies on the ground and gunfire directed at unarmed civilians. However, the communications blackout, particularly the interruption of what was considered the only operational network, Starlink, prevents rapid independent checks and reliable triangulation. The Sudanese Journalists Syndicate speaks of a total blackout. The effects are manifold. Journalistic work is obstructed, humanitarian monitoring becomes more complicated, and gathering evidence for any accountability proceedings is more difficult. Paradoxically, just as allegations intensify, the technical and procedural tools to document them robustly are lacking. This shortage of reliable channels is not neutral. It affects the protection of civilians and the determination of individual and command responsibility. On the immediate humanitarian front, El Fasher had already emerged in recent months as one of the conflict's main fronts. According to the account provided since the beginning of the war, more than 1 million people have fled the city, while about 260,000 civilians are said to have remained trapped without regular access to essential goods and services due to the siege and fighting. After the fall of the Army's main base, the text cites more than 26,000 people fleeing to the outskirts or toward Tawila, about 70 kilometers away. This underscores a now familiar mechanism. Military victory almost automatically translates into new forced population movements. A clear operational priority follows: the creation of stable and safe humanitarian corridors that allow orderly evacuations, regular supplies, and access for medical personnel. At the macro level, the crisis is described as exceptional. The figures cited, more than 150,000 deaths and over 14 million displaced, suggest the scale of the devastation. But numbers coexist with a profile of conduct that worsens the picture. Both parties are accused of deliberate attacks on civilians and of obstructing humanitarian access. These behaviors violate the core principles of international humanitarian law and generate systemic effects. Food insecurity, water and health crises, and barriers to care and protection, impacts that fall particularly hard on women, minors, the elderly, and people with disabilities. To the direct damage of fighting is added a spiral of indirect harms: malnutrition, preventable diseases, trauma, that reduces survival prospects and undermines social cohesion. The United Nations, through High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk and UNHCR reporting, issues two essential messages. First, there is a growing risk of atrocities motivated by ethnic reasons in El Fasher, in light of reports of executions of fleeing civilians and widespread sexual violence. Second, a dual track of action is needed, legal and operational. Legally, the call is for strict respect of international humanitarian law. Practically, for effective humanitarian corridors, aid access, and civilian protection. This approach is not merely declarative. It provides concrete parameters for measuring the parties' commitments and the effectiveness of protections, humanitarian ceasefires, safety guarantees for aid workers and populations, and the restoration of communications. The European Union also takes a stand. In the text, the EU expresses serious concern about the effects of the prolonged RSF-imposed siege of El Fasher, chronic shortages of water, food, and medical assistance in a context of continuous bombardment. Brussels calls for de-escalation in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2736, June 2024, which demands an end to the siege and to fighting, as well as respect for humanitarian law. Commissioner Hadja Lahbib, in a public message, condemns the killing of civilians and the forced flight of families and reiterates the need for safe passages. The EU's stance combines an international legal framework with immediate operational demands. However, effectiveness depends on turning appeals into concrete leverage on the ground and securing verifiable commitments from the belligerents. On the aid front, the European Commission is said to have mobilized more than $300 million over the past 2 years for the humanitarian response in Sudan. The text, however, also recalls critical debate over the 2014 Khartoum process, designed to curb irregular migration through development funding. Such funds, critics argue, may have indirectly bolstered the RSF's coffers, then involved in controlling migration flows. This does not diminish current aid, but raises questions about the coherence and side effects of externalized migration control policies, especially when local counterparts are militias central to internal conflicts. The text offers no definitive solutions but points to the need to monitor funding channels and partner reliability. The fall of El Fasher redraws the map of power. With control of all 5 Darfur state capitals, the RSF gain logistical corridors, resources, and strategic depth, strengthening their position both operationally and at any negotiating table. In parallel, the regular army is effectively excluded from about 1/3 of Sudanese territory, eroding its governing capacity and credibility in the eyes of an already battered population. Any mediation initiative or ceasefire will have to reckon with this imbalance. Finally, the text identifies 3 interconnected levels of risk. Domestically, the legitimacy crisis of the Khartoum government deepens as it proves unable to protect civilians and guarantee essential services. Regionally, the risk of spillover grows. New flows of refugees, illicit trafficking, and the movement of weapons and militias across borders, with repercussions along Sahelian routes and on neighboring states' stability. Internationally, pressure increases on states and multilateral organizations to intensify diplomacy, humanitarian relief, and accountability mechanisms, beginning with systematic documentation of violations. In conclusion, the fall of El-Fasher to the RSF marks a turning point. Territorial consolidation of the RSF across Darfur, marginalization of the regular army over a large portion of Sudanese territory, intensified allegations of atrocities against civilians, and a worsening humanitarian crisis. In response, the UN and EU converge on three intertwined priorities: protection of civilians, with particular attention to women minors and people with disabilities; effective humanitarian access, safe corridors and the removal of obstacles to aid; and accountability, documentation of violations, protection of witnesses and survivors, restoration of communications, and investigative access. Any future development, negotiations, ceasefires, new offensives, or further fragmentation will have to contend with these pillars. Without them, the emergency risks hardening into a permanent condition.